Test, test.
Good morning. We're all here. I believe all, and the entire committee is here. It is 9:01. With that, I'd like to call the meeting of June 25th to order. Can we please call the roll?
Marianne Connors.
Here.
Wanda Van Dam.
Here.
Steve Crump.
Here.
Gerald Feaser. John Gamble. Jessica Gow.
Here.
Derek LaMontagne. Derek Orberg.
Here.
Suzanne Schreiber.
Here.
All are present.
Thank you. With that, Brad, I'm going to ask you to help walk us through the agenda today.
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. And so what we have in front of you today is an agenda with a lot of new business on it. And so we've presented as the team a tentative timeline for your review. This will allow us to start accepting applications on October 1st of this year, opening our first cycle. So as we look at that tentative timeline, it's tight, but it will allow us to get the program started in a timely manner and also hopefully give us an opportunity to seek out partnerships. As you know, I've shared with you before that there's about $400 million state money out there for partnerships through Forever. So that's why we're proposing the timeline to see what it looks like from here until then, but also maybe get some dates on the calendar in terms of meetings early next year to review the properties that come in. I know many of you had talked about that. We're going to have a presentation from our budget director today, and the CFO will be here with him as well to talk a little bit about projections and needs to stand up the program, as well as we're going to review and revise the criteria for farms and farmland. As you will see in the packet that I sent you, we've aligned our program with the USDA program because it is a partner that can provide up to 50% match. So we'll have that discussion. It would be great if we could get through that discussion and move this piece forward, but if we're not to that point, that is fine. But we do need to get through the primary criteria today. That is a goal.
Okay, so with that as our goal, I think if we approach new business with the idea that we can conclude that between 10 and 10:30. That may be ambitious, but I think if we find the hurdles too high, it may be time to, as staff has indicated, we might have to put aside the forest and farmlands, make sure we get through the primary criteria today as a priority, if that's agreeable to everybody. But I think just having an idea of how this morning's going to go with the objective that we're out of here by noon, I think is a good way to just structure our discussion. I notice I need to call for approval of the June 11th meeting minutes. Do I have a motion? Any changes?
I have an addition to the minutes that was left out. On the last back page where I brought up the small lot acquisition process, Doug Weaver had answered the question that I actually asked about the price, that it had been set up in the past to purchase at tax assessed price. And it seemed like some of our committee knew this, but I did not know this, and I don't exactly know who knew it and who didn't. But I thought that was a significant enough answer that it probably should be in the minutes. And Clay had expressed that he did not know. So I would kind of like to have that added to the minutes. I just felt like it was significant enough that it should have been added.
Okay, point of clarification. I think it concludes the discussion and answers the question that was raised. Any other comments?
I just want to say that I had asked for a maximum, and I don't know that that specifies a maximum, but that does answer to a certain extent, a maximum based on what he said. It had not exceeded, I believe he said it had not exceeded tax assessed.
Is it tax assessed or just value?
It's just market. So the way I went and looked at the property appraiser's website, and it's just/market value is the way, the verbiage that they use.
Okay. So I think that just value is the maximum that is then offered. Okay. That clarification?
It is.
Okay.
I still think something should be added to the minutes. I thought
No,
it was a
that's fine.
significant, when
We
a
got
staff
that
person
part.
doesn't know the answer.
We got that part. So we'll make that adjustment to the minutes. Anything else? Okay. With the changes that's noted for addition that the maximum value on small lot acquisition is the just value from the tax roll. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve with the changes?
Second? Motion and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Minutes are passed. Okay. So Brad, we're back to you. The proposed timeline you mentioned is in fact, this is tight. It's as it should be. The idea is that come October 1, we're able to solicit applications. Just as a procedural question, are you planning any workshops to outline? I mean, this is an expanded program, so I guess I'm wondering if there's going to be any kind of workshops to introduce these to the public.
We could certainly have workshops. I will inform the board. We've had a lot of people reach out, so we've been having a lot of one-on-one conversations with our partners and Water Management District this morning, the city of DeBerry. So we've been having those conversations, talking about what, giving updates on where the committee is in terms of criteria. But if it's the committee's pleasure, we could certainly have a.
It was really just more of a question than anything else. I'm sure the one-on-one discussions are meeting the needs of people who are interested. So, okay. So after the timeline, we have a budget proposal presentation. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Aaron Van Cleek, Management and Budget Director. So today we'll run you through what the proposal is for the land acquisition and land management funds. As of 9/30/2021, the original Volusia Forever levy will be completed and all debt service requirements will be satisfied. We will have an estimated remaining balance of $14,090,521. Under this new levy, we propose to have separate funds for land management and land acquisitions. Historically, this has all been accounted for in one fund. The estimated ending fund balance would be distributed as follows. The land acquisition fund would receive $726,711 that has been reserved for land purchases under the prior levy. The land management fund would receive $12,657,605 that has been reserved for land management activities under the prior levy. The remaining balance of $706,205 is proposed to be transferred to a new fund to account for the Barberville mitigation credits that are sold and the related expenses for management of the Barberville mitigation tract. This balance is not part of the prior levy. Rather, it's related to the sale of mitigation credits for the Barberville mitigation tract. However, it was accounted for in the same fund. So since these funds are restricted in use, we propose a segregated fund to keep them separate. It is important to note that these figures are based on current estimates, and we will do an actual true up once the year concludes. So this gives you a look at the forecast for the proposed land acquisition fund. We propose the land acquisition fund will be the fund where all ad valorem revenues are recorded. The Volusia Forever tax base had an increase of 7.6% in taxable value over FY21 values, with 2.4% of that increase related to new construction. At a millage rate of 0.2 mils 8.2 million of revenue will be generated in FY22. We are forecasting taxable value growth at a rate of 3% for all the forecast years based on historical trends. The current proposal includes one full-time dedicated project manager for land acquisition and a portion of the salaries for the director and administrative staff. There are minor operating costs for office supplies, legal advertisements, training, computer software, and fuel. The capital outlay cost for FY22 is the cost of a new vehicle for the project manager, as well as computer and office equipment. If all ad valorem revenues are recorded in this fund would also be responsible for the Community Redevelopment Agency, CRA payments, and taxing district commissions paid to the property appraiser and tax collector. In addition, we propose a 15% set aside for land management activities that would be transferred from this fund into the proposed land management fund. FY22 is estimated to end with a reserve balance of $7.2 million. Of course, the reserve balances will be dependent upon the amount of land purchased. In the event that there are not sufficient reserves to acquire the desired lands, we will have the option of debt or borrowing from one of our other county operating funds. So just because you see the $7.1 million there in reserves does not mean you're restricted to that for land purchases. We do have other options. And this gives you a look at the proposed land management fund. The land management fund is being proposed to account for all land management activities. Its main source of revenue would be the 15% set aside as the transfer from the land acquisition fund. We are also proposing to support the land management activities with an annual transfer from the general fund in the amount of $250,000. Other revenues include land management fees such as timber sales, investment income, and land rentals, which include hunting and cattle leases. Currently, there are 10 full-time positions dedicated to the land management activities. The proposed personnel costs include these 10 positions, as well as a portion of the salaries for the director and admin staff. Operating expenses for the land management include property and liability insurance, equipment maintenance, lease and rental cost, fuel, tools and implements, training, office supplies, etc. Normal operating expenses. Capital outlay costs in FY22 are for land management equipment replacement. Year 2 capital outlay costs include the replacement of a fire plow and a new excavator. Capital improvement costs for FY22 are the replacement of a pole barn and a shed at Deep Creek Preserve, as well as various trail signage. And that's also the forecast years of the $25,000 a year relates to the capital improvement plan for various trail signage replacement and additions on 9 conservation lands. Based on current assumptions and estimates, the reserve balances for FY22 would finish at $12.7 million. Under this proposal, we are forecasting additional excess revenues in future years to build reserves in order to perform land management activities on current and future acquired lands. And I can take any questions you may have.
I did have one question, and I have the number somewhere, maybe you just mentioned it, but how many acres again remind me, how many acres do we take care of?
You have that number, Nick? I'm a money guy, not an acres guy.
Okay, well,
We are currently just over 37,000 acres of lead management of what we manage.
so some of that's not our land. We're managing some of the district's land and some of the other entities' lands also.
That is correct.
And do they contribute anything to the management of those properties in the budget?
Oh, not particularly in the budget, but they do commit resources at times, and they do manage some properties that are owned by the county that they are the lead management agency on.
Okay. Thank you.
So basically, it's an exchange of services that usually is part of the acquisition, actually, right? Is that correct? Also, just for a point of clarification, the transfers, the $12,657,000, these are rolling reserves, correct? These roll every year. So if you see them one year, just for clarification, those will roll forward with every budget year.
Correct. And you do see those reserve balances grow at the bottom of the sheet.
And the 15% set aside is what the staff is recommending in terms of what's necessary to support the activity.
Yes, ma'am.
I would add to that, on the reserve balances that you see, they are growing right now, but they are only forecasted at the current FTE level, based on new acquisitions of land and the size of those acquisitions. Additional staffing would likely be required, as well as additional operating expenses, and those are not yet forecast in this forecast. So the $12 million that's set aside for land management, if you were to have to increase the staffing or operating expenses, you could start to see those reserves go downward as opposed to upward. Therefore, the 15% set aside that you see here, the amount that the reserves are growing by is a couple $100,000 a year, depending on which year you're looking at in this forecast. If you were to set that set aside at 10% as opposed to 15%, you would be eating away at those reserves instead of growing them at about $400,000 a year.
Is there a base level of reserves, an amount, at which by dollars or percentage, you don't want to go below?
There is not currently a target like that, like in our taxing funds where we have a 10% reserve for emergencies. We don't have that type of setup here in the land management fund.
Yeah, I don't know what that number is. I'm just saying there might be a number in terms of a model for how we go forward and defining when we need to make those changes. Okay.
I got a question. Are we shooting too low? I mean, this is a 20-year program. We're going to be acquiring more property, and we're just status quo for where we are right now. And it seems like 2 years we'll be right back asking them to set aside more. And it just seems like it would be easier just to do it now while everybody's feeling good about it instead of later on when maybe it won't be like that. So I don't know. I'm not a state. I'd like to see it grow a little bit. And I think that allows Nick and his staff to do a little bit more maybe than they're doing now. And I mean, staff recommendation is what it is, but I just, from my standpoint, I'd like to see it grow a little. So
we went with the 15% because that's been what the discussions have been. But a 20% set aside, when you combined it with the administrative expenses that are in the land acquisition fund, we were concerned that it might be that we're minimizing the amount available for land acquisition. Because we have the $12 million balance, we were comfortable with the 15% right now because you do have that available. In addition, we've got the transfer from the general fund at $250,000. If we got into a situation in the future, it could be that maybe that's the piece that has to go up in order to complement this program.
I'd also add that as you acquire more lands, you're also going to increase your revenues for land rentals, cattle leases, hunting leases, timber sales. So you will have other revenue sources growing as well. So we could revisit that.
Inevitable. So, okay, with that, question? Oh, Wanda?
I said Wanda can go.
Okay.
Just for a point of clarification, 10 full-time positions for management. Are we talking management of all Volusia County properties, not just the Forever Lands?
This is the current land management staff for all conservation lands in Volusia County.
Okay, for all conservation lands. Okay, so I'm just trying to get in my head the difference between Parks, Recreation, and Forever in terms of land management and payment.
Yeah, this wouldn't include the Parks and Recreation properties. This
Does
is
not.
just the conservation lands. Parks and Recreation have their own staff for our parks.
Okay, all right, thank you.
That does, however, include the staff that manages the 1986 resolution and any other conservation lands. That's why you see the transfer from the general fund in here.
Okay.
And my question builds off of that, so I'm glad I let you go first. Is 10 enough in staff's opinion, or we're going to be expanding the program? Will the 15% give us an increase that allows additional employees?
So as you acquire additional lands, we will have to address staffing, which Ryan alluded to. You might dip into that reserves a little bit, you could see an increase in revenue from other sources, land management fees and land rentals. And then we could address the transfer from the general fund if we needed to.
And we've got a pretty great projection in front of us. And I assume that if it became an issue in 2025 or 2030, we would just revisit and we could bump it up then.
Absolutely.
And I think too, and we've had these conversations, is that we want to have a measured approach to growth of the team. We want to come with you saying that this is what we need this person for, not just to give us a body. We need to have a work plan for what they're going to help us accomplish. So we'll come back at a later time with a solid plan that will help us grow at a measured rate.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just like to point out that maybe we can also look into partnering with private nonprofits or just local volunteers to help. I mean, I'm not sure they can maintain signs and stuff. I know I volunteer to do that in like Door Sleeper. So that is an option other than, hiring a whole lot more staff. Just please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, looking both directions, are we fine? Okay, do we need a motion on this a motion of support, Mr. Attorney? So, or are we just
I think
agreeing?
the
It's just a
council,
staff report unless, I mean, is this
We'll just
going to
accept the
council?
staff report?
Council will have to approve all of these numbers, obviously.
but I think the council would appreciate the support of this body for the 15% set aside. I think that's been discussed in the past as
So is that what, if that's what you're doing and approving, making a recommendation to council to approve that as the 15% set aside, then yes, we would call for a motion.
Okay, so do we have a motion to approve the recommended budget with the 15% set aside as indicated?
I'll make a motion that we approve the recommended budget with the 15% set aside for management.
I have a second. The motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign? Okay,
Opposed.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Brad, we're at
Yes.
here we are.
So if we could go to the next slide, please. And I just wanted to, I think we talked a lot about at the last committee meeting is the purpose. What is the purpose of the primary criteria? What is the purpose of farmlands? And we felt that it had a different purpose. And so that's why you instructed the staff team to come back with some suggestions. And so I want to talk a little bit about the USDA Ag Easement Program that we've aligned the criteria with, what we've suggested for your review today. But first talk about what the purpose of that program is. And so it's got a trifold purpose, and one that it's to protect ag use and conservation values, help farmers and ranchers keep their land in ag, and preservation of open space for scenic enjoyment of the general public are the kind of overarching goals of this agricultural easement program. Eligible properties are cropland, rangeland, grassland, pasture land, and non-industrial private forest land. What do we mean when we're saying non-industrial private forest land? If it's a planted plant, if it's a planted pine plantation, that would be considered cropland. So what they're saying here is if there is a portion, let's say if there's a portion of scrub habitat on the farm, and we know that that's valuable habitat, if that scrub habitat doesn't exceed 75%, we will include that as part of the easement because we want to protect the farm and that valuable habitat. So that's what they're mean. That's the operationalizing non-industrial private forest land. So. Yeah. Okay. And why did we think it was valuable to align ourselves with this program, as they can provide up to 50% of the cost share for acquisition. And so what we do is if we had some properties, we would approach USDA to partner with us. I believe last year, 8 million was expended in Florida to support these partnerships. And I believe that that's projected to grow based on the appropriation that they've received for the next fiscal year. So our question to the committee is, do you agree that we should align with this program and kind of talk through the criteria, Madam Chair?
Okay. Well, we asked for our partners, and then this is the partnership program that's available. I think it reflects at least a direction for going forward with some clarity and certainly consistent with our purposes. Is there a motion to approve aligning with the USDA program?
Can I make a comment first?
Mhm.
Can we change the name? It says forest. Can we change that to silviculture?
I think that's
Because
taken
a
from the.
pine plantation isn't a forest. It's just growing a bunch of pine trees, which is silviculture.
Right. So
Is that what the USDA calls it, forest? Or is that our term on the title?
Yeah,
that's the ballot language.
right.
Well,
Forests and farmlands, the ballot language. So the way that USDA looks at it is two ways. So if it is a planted pine plantation, or even pecan trees, it's cropland.
gotcha.
If it is non-disturbed areas that we think is valuable, then they describe it as non-industrial private forest land.
Okay, but wouldn't that be covered in our other criteria? See, I'm not seeing the separation between our regular criteria that we went through and, you know, and throwing forests into this criteria. So which one do we look at if we have forests? Do we look at this criteria or do we go to the other criteria?
It depends on what partner you get.
Right. John, I think what we're,
At that point, because we're just putting it on a list.
I think the driving goal, though, we have the primary criteria for the environmental properties. These forests are like part of something else. If there is, as Brad gave in his example, you have an area that's grown and an adjacent forest area. You want permission to be able to acquire that also. So it's not that you're trying to acquire the forest, you're acquiring it as part of another purpose. Is that correct?
Okay,
So-
you guys can make it work, but I don't see it. I'm fine. I'm probably the only one confused, so that's okay.
John, I think it depends on what the seller wants. Does the seller want to go for an agricultural easement, or would they prefer to look at the environmental side? Which one does the seller consider important?
Okay,
Because in this case, the seller is going to retain control and possession of everything.
okay.
Okay. I think there may be a lot of forests that might not meet our primary criteria, but might come in as part of another package. So the question before us is, are we in agreement aligning with the USDA criteria?
I would say so at this time. You know, again, I try being from the agricultural side and I try to look at how it, you know, rubber hits the road, what it's going to do like. And I still having a hard time seeing how it's going to be successful, just given our climate here in Volusia County. But, oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. So anyway, I think we need to, we can go with a deal to try it. I'm all for that, but I think we may have to come back at some point and readdress it and tweak it a little bit to make it work.
I would agree. I think we're just trying to move some increments. I think we will benefit from perhaps some discussion with council as to what they hope to achieve through this particular aspect of the program. We're still kind of looking for a policy direction and outcome, but this is the partnership that's available.
Concur.
So,
I would so move.
have a motion?
I'll second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. Okay. Okay, Brad, next one.
Do we want to go through each of the criteria like we did last time for farms and farmland?
Let's see. I think we've adopted these. Yeah. Does anyone have any objection to what's in front of you in terms of, or questions regarding what's being proposed?
Is this a rank or a A and B list? Because we don't have a number.
I think we'll have to figure that out, John. I think that's in the to be determined. I'm not sure there will be an A and B, but I think we will need to determine where we're going.
I would have a comment. I'm pretty good with all this stuff here. You know, I mean, again, it's very kind of abstract, but I've kind of since been thinking our last meeting, and it was something that Suzanne brought up right at the beginning of the meeting. How do we account for stuff we haven't identified yet? Isn't that correct, what you had brought forward, and how do we kind of rank that? And as the meeting went on and we had all these maps, and in talking with John, how we've got probably more maps than anybody. Have we gone through any kind of exercises yet to identify whether it's a potential future area that we need to look to protect, or ag lands? Because in here you're talking about soil types and probably us on this end. I have in my mind, I know what farmland is. Some others may have a different definition, but it usually has to do with soil types, amount of native, the hydrology of the soil, a whole bunch of factors go into it. And I'm pretty sure that we could probably identify through mapping overlays of what we consider to be good, farmland. I mean, some of the best farmland in Volusia County we're sitting on right now. That's where the settlers, it's underneath all of our cities, because that's where people had to support themselves, and that's where they moved to, was the best farmland. The other good farmlands are generally along the edges of low-lying areas that have good drainage, yet get good moisture coming off from the sand hills into their soil. Obviously, on top of maybe Deltona is probably not real good farmland out through there. So we can find some of these overlays to put in it. Also, we can look at some of the environmental aspects of drainage basins and drainage systems that create, water protection and all that. And I think if we could ever, and I'm not a big fan of having stacks and stacks of overlays, but maybe in this case, it would help us see clarity and maybe see where we need to go in the future to try to build new corridors and new basins that we can protect before we're covered up with houses. Because the land's pretty well, we're done over here. It's all just about built out, or soon will be, probably by the end of the year. So it seems, as does other parts of the county. And so the more we can look and maybe identify those areas, and while it's voluntary, maybe if you let some of the property owners know that, hey, we'd like to talk to you, it might help us be more successful. So getting back to a lot of this criteria, it's fine for the most part, and it's a good start. But I think we could also help bring clarity and put a little bit more, I don't forget the words I want to use, but it won't be so abstract to all of us.
I like the idea of picking up on the proximity to development. Is it in fact a threatened area with development as it's anticipated or projected? I think that says something about the importance of picking up one area versus another geographically.
A lot of the farmers that are still left in the area, if they're really close to development areas, they're probably not going to get them to come aboard, because most farmers, especially as they get older, they're waiting for that last crop of asphalt so they can retire. And so it is a fine line to walk and do that. So maybe we need to try to identify those before we got growth all over them, because by then it'll probably be too late.
Okay. And Clay, I'm going to address this to you. When we talk about the proximity and connectivity, can we pick up this other side of, this is picking up what properties are near other like properties? But can we also pick up farmlands that seem to be threatened by development?
Okay. Claire, I'm Director of Growth and Resource Management. Those are very good questions. Off the top of my head, we have maps that show the city's respective water and sewer service areas. And that will be a very good indication of areas that are currently undeveloped, but are within an area that could potentially get water and sewer. Basically, in the state of Florida, if you have water and sewer availability, you already knocked down one of the conditions of sprawl. So therefore, it's a situation where that could be a criteria. Is it fronting upon or included within an area that is part of a designated county thoroughfare? Because once you have a thoroughfare road, you can build it, get impact fee credits, and help expedite your development. So these are some of the things that staff can look at and put those as hard standards so that way we can help gauge whether or not something has imminent opportunities for development outside of an agricultural use, or if that's a little bit further off. Also, trying to look at, are there other state or federal programs? And right off the bat is the Basin Management Action Plan that we have for the outstanding springs. Those are areas that we could utilize, saying if there's a farm activity out there that's conducive, do we want to necessarily continue to maintain that in that area and prevent it from being developed so that you have more straws going into the aquifer and more septic tanks draining into the sinks. So that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, we can.
No, that was helpful, because I'm thinking we have lines, service lines going up to DeLeon Springs. Is that correct?
We are starting to have, Mike Ulrich was very successful in working with Keith Rigger at the city of DeLand to extend their utilities all the way up to the elementary school, so that way we can take some of those septic tanks offline and get them out of the preferred or primary focus area.
And there are some significant areas with access, I'll say access to service lines from Port Orange.
Oh, yes.
So,
give you another example of that. Right now, we have in our comprehensive plan, we have a series of local plans which provide for very specific restrictions on use and those types of things for various areas within Volusia County. And one of them is the Tomoka Farms area and the Sam Sewell local plan. Both of those have provisions that central water and sewer shall not be extended to those areas in order to prevent further intensification of development. So we can also factor that into our analysis as to whether or not there's imminent potential for development of more intensity.
Okay.
All right.
Well, I guess what I'm hearing, I don't think there's anything here that's objectionable, but we may wish to continue to develop some criteria that distinguish the properties that would come under this particular initiative. Is that acceptable? So,
It is acceptable. I do know number 9, I do have a hard time getting my handle around that when you say 50% of everything be protected in the parcel. Does that mean the rest of it we're not protecting, or if we're doing a whole easement on it? It does. As someone who's gone through this exercise on an easement, there are a lot of pitfalls along the way on income generation. I just want a clarification of just what that means. On the other 50%, can I put something else in it that's non-ag use?
I think that would come in the uses that are negotiated as part of the easement agreement, but they want to make sure if they're investing money that 50% of at least 50% of the parcel is in ag production. And so we don't want the 60% to be your sheds and your barns and everything that's tangential to the easement use.
So to build off of that, that's not how I read this. Just because it says, well, greater than 50% of cropland, pastureland, grassland, and or rangeland in the parcel be protected, not, well, 50% of the parcel be used for that use and then protected. So the way it's currently written, it's 50% of whatever part of the parcel is set aside for those uses, is how I read it. So I just wanted clarification.
I think I see what you're saying. You're saying I could have what, use 10 acres, whatever. 10 acres, 50% of that could then be removed from protection,
Right.
is what you're saying.
Well, I'm saying if you have a 10-acre piece, the way this is currently drafted and the way I'd apply it, which is just one person's interpretation, is you have 10 acres and 5 of it is cropland. The way this criteria reads to me is that out of that 5 acres, at least 2.5 of the acres of cropland needs to be protected instead of the overall 10 to 5.
Got it. Ginger? Mike, please.
Sorry, this is Ginger Adair, Environmental Management Director. Brad and I read it the first way, which is if you own 10 acres and you are coming to the USDA or to a program that we have to get an easement, that we would want at least 50% of your ownership to be in the protected easement. And what would be protected would be only those things that qualify, which would be cropland, pastureland, rangeland, right? So, but we can clarify that with the USDA program to make sure that we're interpreting it the way they would.
I'm just putting on my lawyer hat and saying if I wanted to argue.
So you're
Okay.
basically saying 50% of the parcel.
Right.
Instead
Mhm.
of 50% of the cropland and pasture land. Okay. Is that their language or is that ours?
This is their language, but I'm trying to, there's instructions on how to interpret these, and I'm trying to find them, but we can revisit it.
Yeah,
Of course,
I
we
think
want to align with them, so we'll see how they
Exactly.
interpret this.
we'll go with, I think what their alignment is. I had the same question as you, Gerald. My note in the margin was why not 100%? So I think that's a question. The other one that I've got is under management. It's number 11, where we're talking about succession plans. I'll assume that this is also coming from the USDA wording. Is there anything in terms of guidance that speaks to a period of time? That some minimum period that for so many years going out, that this succession plan is binding or enforceable, or something that, gives some more specific definition to how long this is protected and what's going to happen with some enforceable measures behind it.
As I read the guidance document for the program, there was not an enforcement mechanism for the succession plan. So the succession plan may change in the family,
Mhm.
but the easement, what's granted in that agreement, has to be adhered to. And of course, our team inspects these easements on an annual basis to make sure they're doing what they said they would do.
Can the family stop farming? I mean, no, it was just a question. I mean,
Well, I didn't hear the question.
can they stop farming? Is the succession plan to guarantee that the cultivation continues, or is it simply to make sure something outside of that doesn't occur?
Well, the easement would continue on as it is. Who runs it? We have no say so on that.
No, I understand that, but does there have to be anybody cultivating? Is this to preserve, I'll say, local food production?
I would
Or
say
not?
that that's a market-driven question that we can't answer, and we can't force anybody to do. Why would we want to force anybody to go into a losing proposition? And as we can preserve what we preserve farmland today, it may be a losing cause, and so we're going to work and tweak it.
But 50 years from now, our food system in this country could be totally different than the way it is today. And the way I look at it is any piece of what I consider viable farmland in a size that, and it could be small, could be bigger, even if it sits fallow for 20 years, but it's still there when all the houses around it, and that at some point in the future, someone could farm it, to me is as good as we're going to get. I don't think we need to maintain it. We just need to make sure we have minimums in there of what they can't do. And even that, I sometimes have a problem because we put things down today. You can't do this, you can't do that, but we don't know in 20 years that we may want to do something like that. So, let's keep the asphalt off of it. Let's keep the concrete off of it. But whatever, biological activities that are going on there, whether it's trees, scrubs, weeds, well, I don't know about weeds, but is a good thing. And let it go at that, because someone else is maintaining. And like you said, in the easements, we have minimum standards that have to be kept up. We need to keep the invasives down to a minimum. We have all this other criteria, but we can't force anybody to try to do a economic activity on it that may not be profitable, in my opinion.
And I believe if we look back at the purpose of the program, one of the purpose is open space as well. So if they stop farming, I'm assuming, look at the lawyer, that open space would be acceptable under the program.
Okay.
And the other reality of the situation is that in Volusia County, if you have a piece of land that's not under some type of agricultural use, you're going to be paying a hell of a lot of taxes on it. So you're going to probably keep cows, or you're going to do timber, or you're going to do something on there to get that agricultural, the green belt assessment. So we don't need to, I don't think in this group, we need to be too worried about that stuff. There will be, that'll all get worked out.
Okay. Point taken.
Criteria 10 under management speaks to a plan moving forward. So with that being part of the criteria, I think that covers a lot of this.
On what number?
Number 10, under management, it talks about the ranch succession plan or similar plan to address the viability for future generations.
It's 10 on the slideshow, but 11 on the blue sheet.
Oh, I'm
So-
sorry.
Okay. Because in my mind, I would just as soon take 10 out. It's answered in so many other ways that I don't think it necessarily beats. I can see this, if someone comes in and says, well, we want a ranch succession plan for you. All right, I can write something down, but it doesn't mean anything. And if you're going to hold me to that, boy, I wouldn't even consider doing something like this. So if you're going to, that's just my opinion.
Okay. With that, I think, oops, I'm sorry. Derek?
So yeah, I don't know if we're moving on, or if, I want to mention something, a suggestion, I guess,
Sure.
on the first two, and I know we talked about this already a little bit, but I mean, are we able to combine those two that mention the 1 mile proximity? Again, I didn't see those as, if we're counting bullet points again for, our criteria to see how many bullet points they get, I either don't want to double count things or exclude things. I didn't know if that's, if it's either or, then that's like, okay, it gets the checkbox kind of thing, or do we have to have them separate? Because that's what the USDA was requiring. I'm just clarification, I guess, because I missed if that was, we need to have those kind of two separate that mention the 1 mile, or if that's, we're just making our own criteria and trying to match up the best we can, but we're allowed to modify it to make our like 5 out of 10 as opposed to 6 out of 11 or whatever. I'd like to see those together, and maybe then we can find another bullet point for the mentioning of the stopping development in some other cases, because that, again, I didn't really see that as a bullet point. I would like to see not just, added to conservation, but like stopping, in the middle of a other development, just so we have that farmland available, when it's surrounded by other houses and stuff for the future, as well as just other water resource reasons. And so that's my question / suggestion, I guess.
Okay, Brad, are these separate criteria with USDA?
They are.
Okay.
So we're looking at adopting their criteria exactly as written based on this discussion, the way it's going right now, because I actually agree with Derek on 1 and 2.
Mhm.
So is This the question, or that staff is presenting to us, is that we're adopting it the way it's written, or we can, I'll try to create our own and align with this, or I'm not sure I understand exactly.
I think we're getting the criteria to align with the USDA. If we want to amend it, I think we have the ability to do so. But it's being structured for clarity to align with the USDA program.
And I have a question that might be helpful. We have these criteria, but we have a blank for the minimum number. Does the USDA have their minimum number?
So the USDA actually has a point system.
Okay.
And we had discussed in that at a staff level, and in order to align similarly with our primary criteria, we went with the dichotomous yes/no questions. You know, some of the work when we do the report writing may be that we have a sliding scale, and they've done this in the past of high versus low for each of these criteria. So if you get one that meet 2 parcels that meet 7 criteria, if you have that sliding scale from the team who's went out and looked at it on high, low, you can see some differentiation between the parcels.
And on their point system, what's the most important? What's the highest point values that they assign?
While Brad's looking at that, can I add something? So the USDA criteria is fairly complicated, and we didn't include everything here. Some of them are, the criteria are about regional scale issues that that all the properties in Volusia County would either meet or not meet. So we took the USDA criteria that seemed most applicable and that would get properties points, because if Forever purchased an agricultural easement, then the Forever program staff would be filling out that USDA application for reimbursement, not the property owner, right? So we tried to make it mesh with our criteria that we've already had in format, right? So that it's familiar to us and to the committee and still align with the USDA criteria. So to your point, it's absolutely manipulatable, right? We tried as best we could to mesh with theirs and in our way of thinking. So we did not include by far all of the USDA criteria because they either weren't applicable or were always applicable, and it didn't make sense to have points for our program. Is that right, Brad?
Okay.
I don't mean to make you go through them. That was basically my question, is I want to make sure if we are changing criteria, we keep the ones that will get us the most points when we apply for reimbursement.
And we did that because there's our points. Like, okay, if you're this far from something, you get this number of points. If you're this far from something, you get a different number of points. So we looked at that when we said our yes, no questions, and we tried to write the yes, no questions so you would get the maximum number of points.
For example, so the 1 mile, you'll get 7 points. If you're right next to one, if you're adjoining another piece of protected land, you'll get 15 points. So we felt that 1 mile would make us competitive in the grand scheme.
Because I agree, the thing that we need to be most careful of is making sure that we don't come up with criteria that doesn't align, and then we aren't eligible to be considered a partner. So that would be my concern.
That would be true, but then we would also need to come up, because since we don't know their point system, of our ranking system to somewhat align with theirs, right? Am I missing something?
I think that's what we're looking at, is trying to maximize our scoring for that partnership.
I want to offer this out real quick so that we understand where we're coming from. First of all, there's nothing that stops us from being more restrictive. So therefore, in the prior questions in regards to being able to make sure about how we are managing it or how we're looking at it and those things, we can go ahead and as part of our yes, no questions that we're using for Forever, come in, use this as a basis and perhaps add more clarification for our criteria that may be more restrictive than what you're seeing from the FDA. So that first off the bat, you do have that flexibility. The one flexibility we would recommend against is trying to lessen some of these standards. So think of that as you go through this. And I'm going to quote a very wise sage person. And Doug Weaver said, if you look at the original Volusia Forever program, there were a lot of modifications. This is a brand new program that we're going on. We realize that we're not going to be able to hit it out of the park our first time at bat. There are going to be some growing pains with this program. The critical thing is that we can't beta test what we don't have. And so as you go through this, understand that we are going to do our best to get it right out the chute. But the number one thing that we're trying to do is try and align it with something that gives us a stronger guidance. Many of us are flying blind in regards to how you go forward with these agricultural easements. Mr. Pfizer has brought some very real examples of where the current programs are just not working because you're not seeing the agricultural interest jumping on and participating in it. So let's learn from what he's going through, be able to incorporate that into our program, make sure that we're basing it on the current federal program so that it gives us this baseline. And if we see that there's some things that we need to have a little bit more security about, a little bit more stringent requirements, let's go for it. It would be very similar to how we have our current environmental standards that we have countywide. Counties establish that as a minimum standards. The cities have to adopt that as a minimum, but they can be more restrictive. I think that's where we need to land with this.
Okay, I want to try again, Clay, because you're usually good at figuring out what I'm trying to ask.
Okay.
I'm not trying to restrict it.
Right.
I'm trying to figure out how to rank this criteria to align with them. And I don't know because I didn't see their ranking.
Mm-hmm.
And it made sense to me. So what Derek said, I didn't view it as restrictive to combine 1 and 2, but if it is, it is. But I can't figure out how we're supposed to rank this since I don't know what their ranking system is.
Understandable. So what the critical part about that is what I'm hearing from you is staff needs to make sure we get you an access to the criteria that's being used by the federal or by the Department of Agriculture.
Well,
so that
I think this, I don't know what everyone else thinks because I don't know how to go about ranking it based on not knowing that.
right. And what you're seeing here is staff, as Ginger just pointed out, it's not a small list. And so we're working through all of that to get down to the meat. We can go ahead and do this. And what I would recommend is that we go ahead and send it out to all the members. So send it via a link so that way y'all can jump on there, do your research. And then when we pull back together with the county council in July, that's when y'all will be able to come forward and said, yeah, we saw it back in January 25th. We went with what staff saw. But there's one thing that I picked up that I think maybe, do we want to add this? Because that's going to be the opportune time, because then at that point, they'll be able to have the dialogue with the county council because they're going to be relying on you to provide them the insight that they're looking for. So yes, you do need to have that information in your back pocket so that you can make sure that you believe that we're hitting on all the high points that need to be included. Let's go ahead and we can keep going forward with what we have as basically the framework. And if there's something that you see is appropriate for combining, making stronger, maintaining as it's written, y'all have every right to do so. Does that help out?
Could I add one more thing? Maybe it'll help. So our original criteria, we had the 6 categories, right? Proximity and connectivity, et cetera. So what we did as a staff is looked at those USDA criteria and tried to see where they fit in those categories that we already had, so that the 2 ranking systems are as similar as possible, but still get to the goal of that particular kind of acquisition. So for instance, in the USDA criteria, you won't see number 4, will the acquisition further a project begun under previous or existing land acquisition program. That was from our traditional criteria, but felt like it was still relevant to farmlands. So we took all of this pages of criteria and we went through and said, okay, does this fit proximity and connectivity, or does it preserve farm? So we just mixed and matched, got as many of the things that were applicable to us in Volusia County as possible. And so for instance, your point about, is it close to development? If that's something that's important to you as a committee, there's no reason to not include that. Just know that that property may not be as competitive for a USDA grant, That doesn't mean it's not important or that we shouldn't go after it. It's just that maybe it doesn't get that match. That's okay, maybe, right? So the criteria should reflect what you think is important, and to the extent possible, hopefully that also makes properties eligible for a match.
And if I may, just to recalibrate for a second. So we did the yes, no questions versus the ranking because the committee's role is to look and say it meets this many criteria, it should go on the A list or B list. If we provide a ranking and scoring, it's public record and it gives people that we're negotiating with, if they're the highest scorer, an advantage going into negotiation saying, this is the highest scoring property. So that's why it's the yes, no. If you meet this many criteria, you make the decision whether it goes on the A or B list.
Okay.
Now, that's not to say we don't rank it after that when we apply for the USDA portion of it.
Right. So since the number of criteria may be variable as we keep developing, I'm going to suggest that maybe we approach it as a percentage basis, like 60% or 70%, some percentage of the criteria as outlined, as just, again, a way of saying we want to see this much in order to move you along. And then we don't have to worry about adjusting our numbers every time we consolidate or expand or add a criteria. Would that be acceptable? Okay.
I agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the criteria as outlined are fine. I think we may be looking to add some criteria going forward. Anybody want to just leave that open? I am looking for something that I guess addresses the issue of whether the ag use is threatened. I don't know how else to say it. Maybe that's not the best way, but.
Do you want me to make a motion for something? I've got one queued
Well,
up.
whether we choose 60% or we give individual ranking criteria, it still makes a difference if we're going to combine what's currently here or leave it as it is. And in all fairness, Derek brought something up and I said I agreed with him. I don't know if we need to make a motion or if we need to have discussion. I'm just, and I'm asking, is there anyone who has an opinion on combining 1 and 2?
You'd have to put it in a motion and then we can second it and then we can discuss it and then we can vote on it if we want to. Otherwise, there's no need to discuss it.
I'll make a motion to combine 1 and 2. Do you need me to write out what it, basically just put an or in between? Is the property or parcel within 1 mile of either, what it says for 1 or for 2? Does that, I hope that makes sense.
And the purpose is to.
The purpose is because I think it might be redundant. And yes, if it's a yes for either of those, then we're obviously hitting something the USDA wants. But again, I guess I'd have to see, there might be properties that I don't want them to score twice on this. It would either doubly, award points, out of proportion to other criteria that I want to be valued, equally for points, or it would, either be redundant or doubly, counted, I guess, or hurt you twice if you're, like I said, near a development area, which actually I do want to protect, and you missed 2 of them maybe because these aren't next to conservation and something like that. So that's the reasoning, I guess.
Okay. So the motion is to consolidate 1 and 2.
I would make one comment as I originally thought that kind of made sense, but then I tried to run through my mind as to use it in the real world situation. And with what we're trying to do here in Volusia County, where we have a lot of conservation land, they really 2 are kind of separate, because one is for the agriculture and the agricultural infrastructure, but the other one is to say, okay, we've got some conservation land over here that we would like to fill in a quarter, then maybe one doesn't apply to, but the other one does. So maybe they need to be in our unique situation, because we probably are going to have way more conservation land than we are agricultural lands. Having that conservation element in there could or may not be a bad thing to have, to where if they may not be near other agricultural operations or infrastructure. So, but yet it meets the conservation criteria. So instead of being 0, we might get a point somewhere. So we can wordsmith it, but I don't see a problem leaving it as it is, unless, everybody wants to try to consolidate and wordsmith it. But I can see areas where we may lose something if we do try to consolidate it, unless it's worded quite properly. And I don't know that we're there yet.
Yeah, I think it would still get a yes, like you're saying, if it hits either of these check marks.
Any of them,
Yeah,
that's what
right.
you're saying,
But yeah, I see what you're saying. It really, I agree. Like if you guys vote no, I'm not going to be upset or anything, because it'll just depend whether or not we're like 5 out of 10 or 6 out of 11, for points. So I mean, like I said, it doesn't really matter too much either way. But I think, like I said, I don't want to overweight something, I guess, because if
because I would throw in that the one about the succession plan having equal weight, I have a bigger heartache with that, because there's a lot of others on here that carry more weight than a succession.
I'm okay removing that too. Just I didn't comment on. I supported what you were saying.
But because this is a first stab at it, I mean, this is for the most part, I think, a pretty good gig. It's got enough different elements in there that if we come up with the 50 or 60% or whatever number we agree with, having enough bullet points in there that meet some kind of criteria. Because as I understand it, we're still going to rank it. This is to get it on the A or B list, and then when that's done, we still individually rank what we believe is more important than the other properties, kind of correct, or how that kind of works. Well, you're right. That's right. We go ahead and look at all of them on it. Trying to get the deal done is going to be in criteria. And that's where if it's on the A list, let's see if we can get the deal done. I think we're going to have a harder time getting deals done in this go around of Volusia Forever than we did 20 years ago, in my opinion. But
Thank you, because what just happened is what I wanted to happen. I was hoping that I could hear from the farmer people over there on this situation that he addressed, because I was wondering if there was a reason not to do it. I was for it. I wouldn't have known unless you just pointed that out.
So I have a question that builds off of what everyone's kind of been saying. If we choose 50% or 60% or 5 out of 11, which is where I'm leaning on the lower end of numbers, technically we could hit enough boxes in here where it doesn't have farms in it, which is a problem, I think, farms or farmland or forests. So I would suggest for discussion that the properties have to have 1 point at least under the provide for preservation of farmlands category as a gatekeeper, if we can.
Hey, Brad, remember we had talked about that there's some minimum criteria you have to meet to even apply under this set of criteria. Do you have that?
Yeah, it's at the top of the handout. So the parcel must be in an area zone for ag use at the time of application.
So maybe that should say it should be in an area zoned for and contain an ag use at the time of application. Maybe there's some tweaking to that.
Okay. I was about to say a lot of areas are zoned for ag use.
Yeah.
We do have the data from the property appraiser on bona fide agricultural properties. I don't know if we want to go there, but.
Would that cover the forest though? Because I don't want to exclude that because it isn't ballot.
Yeah, I mean, those lands are considered by the property appraiser as long as they have a forest plan, I believe. Isn't that true, Nick? Do you know about that?
It is.
The property appraiser, I mean, if you have forest land that gets that break, you have to have a plan and be executing it.
Yes, generally that it does apply to anything with an ag easement as well, or an ag tax deduction. You have to have a forest management plan to meet the criteria.
So that data is in the system, so.
Okay.
Just a quick comment on the 1 and 2. I was also looking at those as 2 separate items, the conservation and other agricultural operations. So just to further that discussion.
Okay, Derek, you had a motion?
Yeah, I guess if there's a second, I can withdraw it, I suppose.
Is there a second? Okay. Motion fails for a second. We'll proceed with voting on adoption.
Mary Ann, let me, real quick, Derek mentioned earlier at the beginning, you talked about stopping the conservation or agricultural easements to stop potential development. And I think that's a good one to add to that, to add in here somewhere. Adding one doesn't interfere with the
Correct.
USDA's thing. So it's a good one for us. I feel we need to figure out where to put it.
I would suggest
what are you
provide
talking
for
about?
preservation of
I'm
farmlands.
confused.
Yeah,
Well,
okay.
somewhere between 8 and 10, or, you know,
Yeah.
maybe it's the
Just
new
add
number
it.
11.
Add a 10A or something.
What's your proposed language?
Proposed language would be, will the acquisition stop anticipated or imminent conversion to development? Something along that lines.
So the answer would always be yes?
No, it would not. As Clay said, it would, thoroughfare highways and water and sewer would be the
Service areas. Mhm.
Well,
So-
I know, but you could develop it into large acre lots.
good development.
Yeah, I mean, he's talking like quarter acre lots, big subdivisions and stuff with water and sewer, but you can do septic tank on big acreage on ag zone land, so.
The
On one.
the other downfall that I see with that, Steve, is that back in the wars of some years in the past, the county came up with urban growth boundaries. And if you want to bring every farmer out of the woodwork to come lynch you, propose that, because the county staff almost got lynched over proposing urban growth boundaries. You know, no one ever wants to see a line drawn. And so if I'm going to say we can buy this parcel and get it done and strategically stop a lot of other parcels that could be developed or have other potential, and they're looking to do better with their property. I got an issue with that. If we're going to, I don't like urban growth boundaries. It creates winners and losers, and it's not always done scientifically. So,
Clay Irvin, Director of Growth and Resource Management, again for the record. What we could do is, the concern, what we're hearing is that you have farmlands that are poised for development for non-agricultural uses that are out of sync necessarily with comprehensive plans or conservation management plans. We could identify that and then include the criteria that staff talked about today in regards to location within water and sewer service areas, proximity to thoroughfare roads, those types of things, so that way, if it's clear that the future development of that agricultural land for residential or non-residential would have a negative impact on the conservation efforts or agricultural efforts or take critical habitat out, we could utilize this methodology of agricultural easements to preserve and protect those interests. We can put that together so it's available at the July meeting and y'all can bat it around with the county council at that point. And then that way, the merits of whether or not it's tied to science and tied to basic facts that are important and necessary in protecting it and avoiding that whole issue of what you were saying and drawing a line in the sand and saying, thou shalt be able to develop, thou shalt not be able to develop. Is that where we want to land?
I just don't see the difference. And I keep coming back to like Benedict's farm over on Airport Road, right next to big Port Orange subdivisions and stuff. I'm not so convinced that it's a good idea to preserve that for agricultural land forever, because those people bitch and moan about every pesticide application and everything that goes on in that property. I mean, they almost harass the farm.
Well, it's a voluntary program, always.
Yeah, I know it is, but I mean, to me, we maybe do better, maybe a higher ranked project to be away from someplace like that. I don't know what's a more important property or not, as far as where it's located and to stop development. To me, if you protect any of it, you're stopping development. So
Again,
It's-
it's at the board's discretion on how y'all want us to handle it. We know that this was one of the items brought up as part of the ballot language. We just wanted to make sure that we were giving y'all the opportunity to say yay or nay to the different criteria. If you feel that it's important for us to do that, I think we've enumerated what criteria we feel is appropriate. We can always dig in and see what other stuff is available out there and be able to come up with an alternative if you feel that that's a valid effort on behalf of the Volusia Forever program.
Well, I do, but I don't know the consensus of the group. We've seemed to have covered. Do we want to speak to this, or would we like to get direction from county council? Since it's fundamentally, it's a policy issue as to program purpose that perhaps the council should weigh in on.
I would at least like to have something to go into council with. I would like something put together so that when we do go to the county council, since we're not going to do verbiage today, I would like to see something regarding this when we do go to council. So we have.
As a
something to
means
go.
of affecting development patterns.
I agree.
And I
Okay.
think
I don't think this thing's perfect. But I mean, we can beat it up and we can add, subtract and do all this. I mean, I think this is a good first shot. I think we put a number, 6 or 7 out of these 12, and we run it up the flagpole. We see how it performs.
Do
the
we
first
want a
year.
criteria that reflects any impact on development patterns? No?
I don't see that it's
Okay.
helpful, but
Okay, Gerald?
I would, I would move that we adopt what we have right here of this 12, I'm going off this paper, that as long as it meets 7 of the 12 items, that it would be ranked.
Okay, form of a motion.
I'd
move
second
on.
that motion.
We have a motion and a second to adopt as is. Further discussion? Wanda?
Question, please. Are we now talking about on the blue paper, the very first properties must meet a minimum of X number of criteria to be eligible for consideration? That's talking about just being eligible to come in front of the board. That's not talking about what the board has to come up with in order to rank it as an A or a B, correct? Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. There's a motion and a second to adopt the criteria. Oh, sorry, Derek.
Oh, yeah, so if we're still doing a little discussion.
Question?
Yeah, I mean, I do still, I support what Mr. Crump was saying as he was supporting me, I suppose, and saying I would like to see some other thing added that I think is missing at some point. I mean, so I don't know if that matters then if we can improve this. Obviously, we got to start somewhere, but I mean, we're here now, so I was hoping we can at least have a mention, I guess it was maybe mentioned to the staff that they will try to come up with some other possible verbiage, or it could just maybe be added into one of these, like it says, we're protecting important soils from over paving, or something like that, which would suffice if it's going to be developed. I mean, somehow it could be worked in it.
I think that would be a different motion.
Oh,
Okay,
different
I
motion,
think
yeah, just
I'm
discussing
hearing
this.
this motion to take it as is.
This on.
Yeah, so I don't
Take it
support it as is.
Because I agree. We're going to tweak this later on. I mean, even thinking where someone said on the one of them here of the 8, 9, and 10 that has to meet one of those, that may be a good idea and something, but I want to think about that because that does get to the heart of the matter right there in those 3. But to move on so we can get out of here and not have to meet 10 times between now and then, I would, that's why I make the motion. Let's move on with this. We got a good start with it. And if we can tweak it as time moves along and readdress it. Is that correct there, people? Yes, thank you.
That would be as is. If that motion doesn't fail, then I guess there would be a follow-up
That's right.
in terms of adding.
Clarification, so is it the 12 points or the 11 points on the PowerPoint? Which are we voting?
Sorry, the PowerPoint is numbered incorrectly. So the 12 on the blue sheet would be what we're talking about.
Okay.
And Gerald, you said 7. Right?
7 of the 12.
7 of the 12.
I think that's a little high.
Yeah, I think it's too high.
That's fine.
Too high?
That represents 58%.
That's good.
That's too much? Okay.
Okay, so the motion is to adopt the criteria as is with the requirement, you don't want to go with the percentage, you want to go with the number?
Seven of
7
the,
of 12
of the
as
12,
reflected.
that it meets 7 of the 12.
Could we make that a separate motion? I mean, is sorry, the number?
You want the ranking to be separate? Can we,
Just approve that these are the ranking and then to come up
all
with a
right,
number.
we'll make the
separate.
separate a separate motion. We'll just adopt the criteria
Okay, however you want to do
outlined.
it, Madam Chair, I'm easy.
Okay. Okay, the motion is to adopt the criteria as listed, 1 through 12, and as outlined. There is a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Can I get a roll call, please?
Marianne,
No.
Wanda Van Dam,
No.
Steve Crump,
Aye.
Gerald Feaser,
Yes.
John Gamble,
Yes.
Jessica Gao,
Yes.
Derek LaMontagne,
No.
Derek Orberg,
Yes.
Suzanne Schreiber.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. And now can we have a motion for the, how many criteria would be required?
I would move 7 of the 12 be approved. I do have a question. I've always learned that when we have split votes like that, if we can identify issues that we can readdress to make it more consensus, I would like to do that. But if you want to do that now, fine. If not, then I would make a motion 7 of the 12. So
I would like to do that now because I agree with what you just said. I don't know if another motion has to be made, but I'd like to discuss to get to the core of what we just disagreed on.
yeah, I agree. I mean, if there's anyone who wants to make any comments on anything we could tweak.
Sure, sure. It was purely the issue of having something included now to bring forward to county council, something that speaks to the impact on development patterns.
So the discussion was all over the place, and I actually agree with wanting something. And since it was said that it was going to be changed in the future, that was why I voted yes, but I 100% support something addressing development. So I could have been the tiebreaker vote had I understood, but I'm going to be honest, I did not understand, and I definitely 100% support that going forward. I would have liked to had it before council, but in an effort not to have another meeting also, because I don't want to keep having meetings and it seems like we've had a lot added, that was the reason I voted yes.
As a potential solution, go ahead and run with the vote that's been taken, go forward with it, because what we saw is that y'all did support those 12 criteria. We can bring it forward at the July workshop. I promise, we won't make y'all meet before that. I promise.
No, I agree with them though, that we wanted it, I wanted it before the workshop.
Well,
I actually wanted to make a recommendation to council myself along with what they're saying. I did.
well, we can go ahead and we can phrase it such that it was something that was identified that some of the members felt it was important to go forward with it. Some of them have had some concerns, so that way, and we can outline the criteria. And at that point, if the council feels that it's important to incorporate that at your subsequent meetings, we can come up with that criteria and add it later. Does that make sense? So then that way, the issue is brought forward to the council. The generalized criteria, we'll work on those obviously before that meeting. It'll come forward. We'll get direction at that point from the council. If the council feels that merits an additional effort, we'll go forward with it, making those changes. And then as part of your subsequent follow-up meetings, we can finalize those criteria and bring it back. Again, remember, we're going to be tweaking these. And the thing is that right now y'all are kind of at loggerheads over that particular issue. So let's go ahead and at that point, have the council break the tie. And then that way we know which way to land. We'll make sure it's clear. We'll make it very understandable such that, that the advisory committee saw this as part of the issues. There was a healthy debate about it. They were not able to necessarily come to final decision as to whether or not that criteria needed to be incorporated, but there was discussion that it needed to be brought forward to the county council so that they could basically make the determination.
I think that's fine. I think it's more, it's not a substantive issue, Gerald. I think it was more timing than substance. So I'm fine. I'm fine with the vote.
You know, because
So-
I mean, I could take this thing, spend 3 hours beating
I'm-
this to death right here.
We're working
Because there's
on
a
that.
lot of them, I'd say, okay, here's in the real world situation. We got a lot of other stuff to cover, and we're going to come back and
Yeah.
readdress, like a lot of stuff. We'll probably readdress a lot over the next year, especially after the first cycle. I feel confident. I would make a motion that you have to adopt or have at least 7 of the 12 to be placed on the list.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor. Second. Motion and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed,
Aye.
likes?
No.
2 no? Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we are at the small lot acquisition. We are behind. We're going to make up some time here.
So
Okay.
at the committee's request, we brought back some more information on the small lot acquisition program, and Ginger's going to give an overview.
Okay. So just a little bit of an overview about small lot. You've seen this information before, but it may be worth that again. So the original intent was to supplement the efforts of the Forever program by acquiring those sensitive lands in the antique subdivisions. They're typically small lots. They have limited or no physical access or infrastructure. And the goal was always to assemble enough contiguous small lots into significant tracts. And there's some strategic sort of preventing other people from getting enough of continuous tracts to do a development. Of course, it has modified acquisition procedures. We talked a little bit about that last time. No survey, no appraisal, no environmental assessment, and then just basically a limited title search. A little bit of the data. So there are 9 primary antiquated subdivisions that are identified in the county. Since the original Forever program, we have acquired or purchased 1,525 parcels. We've had another 123 donated to us. It's a total of 2,519 acres at a cost of 1.6 million. So it's $647.56 per acre on average. And here's just a map of those targeted subdivisions. And you can see the little gray dots are basically parcels that we have actually acquired. This per acre cost was part of the questions that came up last time, sort of how much have we paid? And then here is the description in the current resolution with a suggested change that I think hopefully gets to Ms. Schreiber's comment about how do we know how much to pay, or is there a maximum? And so the suggestion is to add the language that matches the property appraiser's wording so that the just/market value of the parcel as published by the Volusia County property appraiser will form the basis of any offer to purchase said property.
All right, any questions? Is there a motion to adopt the recommended language?
I move we adopt it as presented.
Is there a second? Motion and second. Discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, like sign? Excellent. Okay, discussion of urban parcels.
So one of the things that as staff, and I think we heard this loud and clear at the last meeting, is when we start talking about these different types of programs or areas related to the Forever program, the first question we need to ask ourselves is, what is the purpose? You know, what is the purpose of the primary criteria? What is the purpose of what are we trying to do with the farmland criteria? So that's kind of what we wanted to have the discussion with the committee now is, so when we think about these urban parcels, what is the conservation and resource-based recreation purpose of an urban parcel acquisition program. So I think the committee having that discussion will help staff moving forward.
I can think of areas that have been preserved by different entities, but within urban boundaries. I think the Riviera Park is what it is now. It's actually in Holly Hill. But that was a large, very old wooded area, not something that was new. It was beautiful. It became a stormwater treatment area. But a large forested area within an urban environment was preserved and is in use now. That's what's in my head in terms of what this would be for. And I don't know. I'm trying to think. Ormond has a large central park. I don't know how that came about, but it's through a large swath of the city. It has a boardwalk. Clay, you must know. You were probably part of that. But it's a boardwalk area. It has ponds and retention areas. And it's, again, it's a passive recreation within an urban environment. So.
Central Park was the city manager's dream back, Gerald Outhouse. He did that, and it was actually a series of borrow pits that they acquired after Rex Dills, the owner, got done digging to China there. And so he was very instrumental, and hence Mr. Outhouse was from New York, so hence the name Central Park. The proper, if you're using Ormond as an example, when I was there, we did the acquisition of the Rivers property. This was land that was originally part of a DRI that was allocated certain land uses. It was also smack dab in a lot of the wetland areas that feed into Tomoka State Park. And the city, through the Trust for Public Land, negotiated with the property owner and was able to float a bond to acquire that property. Those would be something that you would want to see done. Recently, New Smyrna Beach has done a similar type of acquisition down in their Bay Area.
Turnbull. Right.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So again, those would be things that we could see being priorities. Right now on our list of A properties, there's some land that is Wilbur by the Sea and Ponce Inlet. It's roughly, 43 acres of coastal wetlands that are in there that we have a willing seller on. And we're working with them right now to see if they're still willing to participate with us. So again, that's a area that is highly urbanized, but there's still this remnant piece that has connectivity to a critical part of the habitat.
I
So
will
there
just
are,
mention though on that one, it's on the old A list, so it met the original criteria for what it's worth. So some smaller parcels do meet the criteria that we talked about last time, and we'll talk about again. But maybe I think like the city of DeLand brought up some examples of areas that under the existing criteria may not meet it, and so is that valuable, and how do we facilitate that if the committee thinks that's important?
Okay.
I think those urban, I'll call them an urban conservation areas, are really important. I think it's definitely something we need to figure out how we're going to rank them. And I would rank it very highly if another municipality agreed to pay for the maintenance of it. That would be the first hurdle they would have to clear. The next thing I would like to see is, that resource-based recreation. I would really like to see something handicap accessible, paved trails through it, paved parking areas, which may be different from what we've normally done in the past, but in a more urban area, I think that would be a more welcomed and inviting recreation usage.
Would that not be, with like paved trails, be something more under ECHO provision I mean, I think it's our deal is to, I don't really see us providing a lot of upcharge or upgrades, but let the other entities do that.
I don't want it excluded, is what I'm saying.
Right.
If
So city parks and recreation Doesn't some of this fall under city parks and recreation?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And see, one of the things is, we've been a part of buying up houses, in flood areas and then converting them to stormwater projects and stuff like that. There's money for a lot of acquisition if you're going to do something other than preservation. In most of these city things, they're going to want pretty intense recreation development, if not, used for stormwater or something else. I wonder if we're not the funding source for that kind of work when there's others, St. John's and all kinds of other money out there to do those kind of projects. And I mean, we've always had matching funds from other people to do a lot of that work, and it was always with another purpose. But they end up being, like they were talking about Central Park. We have a county park where the dog park is. There was a stormwater project. If you went to it today, you can motor around that, big borrow pit and everything. And most people don't know it has stormwater purpose, but that whole area was a big flood prone area in Holly Hill and Ormond Beach. And it was all done with other money from stuff. So I think if you want multi-purpose stuff, if you're buying a big 40-acre natural area, it's a little different, and that fits our criteria. But if they want to build a city park there, I think that there's a better way of doing it.
So I live on Central Park. I live on a lake at Central Park that was a borrow pit, and it is used for stormwater. So, there were, before they connected all the canals, there was a pump that pumped the lake down during hurricanes across the street from me. They connected every lake, there's 5 lakes. They dug canals and connected them because they said that would help with flooding. They're still used for stormwater. So I'm just pointing that out. I actually asked the question about Parks and Rec because I know that Ormond Beach is going through their Parks and Rec plan right now. I believe it's either a 10 or 20-year plan they're talking. And one of the questions was about, would you like to see new parks in the city? So I don't believe that forever was meant for stormwater. I'm just agreeing with you. But since I live on Central Park, I wanted to bring that up about how those lakes are used and used to this day for stormwater control.
Yeah, I think the thing that's going to be hard for us is to emphasize that the acquisition with forever funds would be for the purpose of conservation and preservation, not active recreation. I think that's going to be the challenge of how do we come up with a ranking criteria to make sure it's conservation and preservation versus active recreation.
I want to point out also that there was someone who spoke in Ormond Beach, and this is actually going on in numerous places. I know probably everyone here knows of golf courses being developed. And so in Ormond Beach, there has been request for the golf course to be turned into a city park. And since Parks and Rec are looking at their plan right now, that came up. I don't know what's going on with every golf course in the county, but I know that DeLand is going through it. And there's actually 2 in Ormond, not 1. I don't know about the south side, but you keep that in mind when you're talking about urban.
Yeah, Indigo as well.
If we get back to our original criteria, if it meets that original criteria, and we want to give extra bonus points in there to an urban area where a city or county, but usually a city, provides a little extra environmental protection to their development sites that fit in with what we're trying to do, then I think they should get bonus points somehow for that. What I have a problem with is in cities, and I'm only going to speak of the city that I live around, which is around here, that we see a lot of destruction of really nice properties, and they're putting houses on 40-foot lots with very little green space in between it. The green space is usually under a power line or something like that. And then if they would come in and say, we got a piece right next door we want to preserve, I'd say, no, you don't get any brownie points. But if you come in here and you're developing a green, sustainable type of development to where you have walking trails and green space and places for kids to play or whatever, and it so happens to tie into another parcel that could be protected that meets those criteria, before, from wetlands or whatever, or water quality, then I think they should get points and be ranked in that same criteria in a ranking process. But they've got to show they're good stewards of the area, and that they've already got a plan that their citizenry want. And of course, most people don't like to see the development into the intensity of what's being done today, but unfortunately, no one stands up to that. So yet.
Oh, we have a comment from the audience.
From the sage.
Pleasure to be noted as a sage. I think you have to be in your 7th decade to achieve that high honor. So I appreciate it. Just briefly, by way of background, I think we did 4 partnerships with cities: New Smyrna, DeBerry, Deltona, Port Orange. Smaller pieces, ranked. But they were willing to partner, because that was my first question to them. Are you willing to participate? And that kind of would separate the men from the boys type thing. And they were all, didn't really have any resistance. And I think they were all 50%. I think that's my recollection.
On acquisition.
Yes.
And then are they responsible for the management of those
Yes, in
areas?
every case, because it's like, we're not going to manage these small
Right.
parcels in cities. That wasn't on the table. As far as I was concerned, we had enough to say grace over thousands of acres. So they were willing to do that. Let me mention one's a little unique, but you have to be flexible. County council approved it. I thought it was fine. Deltona, the Thornby piece, it's about 25 acres, and there's a 1 acre playground there. All right. Well, this is balancing act. So council and city, everybody agreed. We went forward. 24 plus acres, that's my recollection, around 25 acres. And about 1 acre is an active child's playground. That's all it is. Not very intense. So, these are things that come up. Our partner was asking, and we went back and forth, and at this point, they may have some unpaved trails on that property. So anyway.
Doug, those properties all met the original criteria.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and like the opening salvo is, are you willing to partner? And like I said, I think they were all 50%. I mean, if they're willing to do something less, but this is a countywide program, right? So, everybody in the county supported this type thing, 75%. You'd hope that we're not asking you to totally carry the load, but we want to show good faith and put your dollars in.
so if the basis then for considering urban parcels would be that you meet the ECHO criteria, primary criteria as stated,
Yes.
and you participate in the acquisition
Yes.
at 50% and assume responsibility for management of the property thereafter based on a plan approved by the county.
Right. Now, it was historically 50%. That was my recollection. If they came and said, we'll do 35, well, okay, we'll consider that. But I always like to start at 50.
But that's a criteria that gives them enough to come in the door, and if council wishes to waive that, they can.
So I think I have a slight concern with making an urban parcel more intense than others for purchase by the board ranking. So my comment was going to be that I think that the criteria that we have now is set up to where urban parcels can meet them, even if it's just on the easement side, and that discussion can be had because it's already happened in the past. So it's more of a facilitation of discussion with the municipalities on what projects would you like to see move forward and working with the sellers. I don't know if we want to add additional criteria to make it harder for them to enter the program with matching funds and things like that, because that's already a criteria on the deal side. But I don't know if we need a separate set of points for the urban parcels, because the ones that are worth preserving for conservation or resource-based recreation should be covered under our existing criteria.
So I want to address this scenic highway byway situation, which is listed on here as number 4. It is automatically presumed by most of the public that scenic highways are protected. And that is, well, whether the public knows or not, they take a long time to get approved as a national scenic highway or a state scenic highway through FDOT. So they are approved based on resources that they have. And strangely enough, those resources can be taken away by development, and advocacy by, there is no advocacy by FDOT. It's up to the individual byway organizations or nonprofit organizations. So we have byways in the state of Florida, especially South Florida, who've had all their resources taken away by development, history, scenery, whatever qualified them. So I just wanted to say this out loud, because 2 byways in our county are undergoing development right now. And this constant by the public of assuming things and then finding out after the fact, it just keeps happening. And that could actually be said for, you know, a lot of the development, but especially with scenic highways, because the signs are up that say they were a scenic highway and they had to be approved by someone. So this perception is there, and it's not the case.
Yeah, I feel very sad about that as well, Suzanne. I hope that we can preserve those, and I hope that this will do that. I did want to mention, say I agree with something that I think Mr. Pfizer said earlier, that that we shouldn't be giving brownie points to if they just highly developed like the land around an urban area. Like essentially they would have spread out their development, but instead they like scrunch it all into one and then like just have a little parcel next to it that they want as conservation. So I guess one way to do that is to somehow award a point to cities that encourage, the term is low impact development, right? So I mean, if that is the way that they're functioning as a city, or maybe that particular development near there, that is, indicating that there's other things protecting our areas, our habitat, our water, our, just the green infrastructure, as opposed to just saying, oh, we'll just make little islands where we just save that and everything else is just paved over. I mean, we wanted, this might be a way to somehow, encourage that. I mean, I feel bad when I see cities, not recently developing in sustainable ways. So I don't know if there's any way we want to or can, or at least reward the cities that are, willing to do that. So, and the developers too, I mean, within a city as well, if they're doing the right thing, I do want that to be rewarded.
I have a question pertaining to the comp plan, and this program would be affected as well. With our scenic highways, since we have, I believe 3 that I know of, is there anything in the comp plan for buffers with the scenic highways? Because to my knowledge, there's not.
Clay Irvin, Director of Growth and Resource Management, again for the record. What you see is that we have supporting policies primarily in our transportation and intergovernmental coordination. In order to get a designation as a scenic highway within the state of Florida, you have to create what you call a corridor management group. That is a group, and really getting into the weeds and the details, and I apologize. The state of Florida mandates that it's a grassroots organization that pushes for these scenic highways. So it cannot necessarily be a city or county that pushes for it. It actually has to be a group of residents who are identifying this. So what you see along A1A, along the loop, the River to Sea loop, all of those, is that it was an initiative of citizens. That first group is called a Corridor Advisory Group, a CAG. They get through, once they go through approximately about a year and a half process to get through the DOT just to get the designation, then they transition into the management group. We have in our comp plan requirements to coordinate with the various corridor management groups and coordinate land use decisions and those types of things. So to your point, if there's something occurring along those various ones, in other words, a comp plan amendment or some other amendment, we would send that information to that group so that they're aware of what's going on. We've set up ourselves minimum corridors in these critical areas in regards to landscape buffers and those types of things to try and preserve as much as we can, depending on what the particular area is at. For example, A1A in Ormond by the Sea is part of the scenic loop, Ormond Scenic Loop, but it's already developed. So what you see in their corridor management plan is that there's a request for architectural standards, signage standards, and improvement of pedestrian and bicycle facilities. And that's why you see with new development that's occurring along Ocean Shore and Ormond by the Sea, enhanced architecture, better signage, better parking. We are acquiring parking areas. We are improving the sidewalk systems up there. So we do have some linkage, but there's no specific mandate or prevention of development.
Right. I'm talking about buffers though. So along the loop, there are homes with no buffer at all. There was a 175-foot buffer. Then there was a 50-foot buffer. So I'm asking specifically about buffers and not just on the loop, but all scenic highways, because there seems to be no rhyme or reason. Are you saying that every scenic highway CAG is responsible for coming and discussing that on the comp plan?
Okay, not necessarily. Just to clarify what's going on. If you have pre-existing development, so Halifax Plantation and many of the areas along, say, Beach Street and Norman Beach were already in development or developed when the scenic highway was created. So you cannot go back and necessarily take away their rights without going through. But so the 50-foot buffer was put in place as part of the Halifax Plantation PUD. The 175-foot buffer was put in there because of the Plantation Oaks PUD. All the other developments that occurred were prior to that even being in place. So what would happen is going forward, we would have to be able to negotiate that with any kind of developer who's coming in because we don't currently have a one-size-fit-all buffer adjacent to the scenic highways.
So are you saying that basically organization needs to come to you to negotiate the buffer on any scenic highway? Is that what I just understood?
The corridor management group is consulted by staff as part of the review of any kind of development occurring adjacent to one of those scenic highways. Staff is aware also that there is a need for minimum buffering and minimum requirements, and that would be based on what the resources are in place at the time of application. So if you have a cleared field adjacent to a scenic highway, we would have to talk about what would have to be done in regards to planting and those types of things. If you have a naturally vegetated area, we would be looking to do some sort of preservation in that area based on a 50-foot. Right now, we have a current minimum 50-foot buffer adjacent to certain roadways. Also, we have provisions that before we undertake any kind of public works activity within the right-of-way adjacent to it, that would require removal of trees or something along those lines, that we come up with a management plan to ensure that we don't have any negative impacts on the scenic highways.
Okay.
Could I ask something, experience that we're going through right now with the 4-laning of US 17 between DeLeon Springs and Barberville? There's a row of trees along there right now it's on our property and also on the state's property. In the 4-laning of that, it will be all clear cutted down. When I asked the state if they're going to replace those trees, no. So the biggest culprit in destroying a lot of our scenic byways is not the developers or the property owners. It's the state of Florida. So we don't want to start, having private people have to create the cure for policies that are beyond their control.
So Toscana, I believe, was approved 10 years ago. When I looked it up, it looked like it was around 2010. There is no buffer at all, none. They're built, there's very few scraggly trees left in front of the homes on the west, and I'm even referring to the west side of the road. Maybe the neighborhood was approved more than, I only saw 10 years ago.
The final plat may have been there, but Toscana has been part of the whole project since the original DRI was identified.
Can I ask, I think it's a great discussion. Are we looking to look at potential criteria for establishing buffer areas within these scenic byways? Is that?
Well, I think, I think we need to get back to our urban parcels.
Well, that is one of
The-
listed
the-
under urban.
I saw
parcels.
it there. I see it. It's one of the items mentioned. I guess the question at a more basic level is, do we need additional criteria on urban parcels? If what has been done has been accomplished under existing criteria, I think Jessica has presented the idea, should we have higher standards? Is there a basis for higher standards? I will say, looking at the primary criteria, there are the expectation of matching funds is there, and the management by others is also part of that primary criteria. And while I agree completely with Steve that that should be essential to urban parcels, I think it is addressed in those areas. Is that what you're looking at, Jessica?
Yes, I think that the urban parcels that meet the criteria under the existing criteria that we will hopefully finalize today can move forward, but I don't see the need for additional criteria.
Okay.
As a general observation, this came up in the last meeting. We were shown the map with the long-term, basically the beachside being flooded. Ginger brought that map forward with climate change, I believe. And this is just a general observation, and it actually pertains to this. The people on the beachside are paying taxes to this program. So they're paying taxes to it right now, and they're paying taxes to it in the future. And then we're showing that they're flooded out. So it's just something, food for thought.
Well, what would you like to do for them? I don't get where you're going with it.
I'm
If they're
saying
all
that-
developed, it's gonna
I'm just
happen.
saying they're paying taxes towards this program. That's all
And
I'm
they
trying
can
to
use
say.
all the land that we buy, right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Eventually, it showed flood in that area.
Is that, do you think that's a responsibility of this program?
I'm saying, what happens to their money? That's all I'm saying.
They lose. They bought over on the beach side, no different than a Category 5 hurricane hits them and their house gets knocked down. They lose.
I'm not suggesting we should buy property over there. I'm
Okay.
saying that they're paying into the program the same as anyone else.
Yeah.
And long-term, perhaps that should be considered.
For the
It's just a
purposes,
general observation.
for the purposes of this discussion, I think the primary thing is, do we need added criteria? And it seems to me that what we have used in the past, which is the general criteria, has been successful. And that there are points in there that we can use to get across our desire for the partnership and the management. So to me, the question is, do we need extra criteria? And I'm not sure that we do. I think what we've got has been successful, and I don't see a reason why it won't continue to be successful.
Is that a motion?
So I would make a motion that we do not add any criteria for urban parcel development or acquisition, that we maintain the existing program as is for now, moving forward when it comes to any urban parcel acquisition.
I second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Can I abstain? Is abstaining an option? I just wondered for future votes.
Is abstaining an option, Mr. Attorney?
I mean, typically, I guess you can. Typically, you're just not a part of the vote if you're not here, which would be an abstaining by not being present. I guess you could.
You wish to abstain? All right. So indicated. Okay. We're at old business, primary criteria. We can do this.
So the first
Brad?
one that we had under that the group had tabled was under man, can't speak today, proximity and connectivity. And so we, just to color in and provide some context, it was member Gao who suggested more about looking at connection of habitats. And I think we did that with some of the later criteria. So there's really no alternative proposed by staff here, just open for discussion what you'd like to do with this, this criteria.
So was the question at the meeting, do we want to include the county's environmental core overlay as part of the language?
Yes.
That was the question?
Yes.
Okay, so
There were
today-
two, I'm sorry to interrupt. There were two questions. Is the property within the priority 1, 2, 3, et cetera, was a suggestion from a community member. And then you all had a discussion and said, well, maybe adding the environmental core overlay was good, but regardless, number 3 would be a new criteria from the existing program.
Is there a recommendation? Does this add anything, Ginger, in addition to what we have?
I think that it's not a bad thing to incorporate this Florida Ecological Greenways Network because that is a new program with a new funding source. We may get to those properties through some of our other criteria, but I don't think that it hurts to have this here. The only thing that we should probably think about is sort of what Mr. LaMontagne said earlier. If we add another criteria, does it skew the priorities? For instance, if you're in this ecological greenways network and you get the point for that, did you already also get the point for, say, number 2 or number 1 under furtherance? So staff was sort of ambivalent, I think, is the right way to say that.
If the scoring has more range than yes, no, does having this sort of background, not as a requirement, but as background information, it was the idea of like an enhancement or a bonus or this is recognized as a higher a strength of an application.
I think that is a good way to think of it. The other thing is if it's within one of these priority areas, then there is the reasonable expectation of matching funds. So that point below it, you'd pick that one up. So it may be exactly what you said. In the staff analysis of a property, we could certainly tell you it is within this area. And that may play into which things get to the A list versus a B list, or, and we could tell you if that meant that the parcel got other points that are in the existing criteria.
So if I may, not so much on the ecological greenways network, because I agree that can be incorporated into other criteria. For the environmental core overlay, I think my concern when attending virtually was that we were discussing changes to, does the property contain wetlands? Are those highly functional? So I know we have another revisit item that is the property containing highly functional wetlands. So if that passes, maybe it is a little bit of overlap. If that one is not there, we don't really have a criteria that protects wetlands, which I think should be something that we consider. So the environmental core overlay gives us that opportunity, in addition to important habitat, which I know we've pulled in. So again, that's covered. But all that to say, if we adopt the later item on the wetlands, then maybe this isn't as important, but to me right now it is.
So do we need to act on this now, or can we move forward and then come back to this if necessary?
I think we can move forward, come back to this if necessary, if that's acceptable.
I have just a suggestion, I guess. Yeah, I would like to see that wording in under one of the bullet points, whether it has to be a separate one. Again,
Which wording is that?
this whole statement number 3. So I mean, I agree having the priority 1, 2, 3 of the Florida Ecological Greenways Network and the Wildlife Corridor and the core overlay. I mean, I want that listed in here because yeah, we might get the matching funds, or it's obviously important lands and just coming up with it. So the 2 areas, in case this wasn't clear, where I think it would be most likely is either combining it maybe with this just number 1 in the proximity. But if that makes it too long, I think also we could do number 2 in the environmentally sensitive lands, which talks about, is the property, does it contain acreage in the Florida natural areas inventory? Somewhere else, maybe in environmentally sensitive lands. I was thinking like this is, it might be relevant there, just if we want to combine. So again, we are not adding points, so we mess up our skewing. Not that it would, I mean, I'd be okay with it. It's also just approved as another point, I suppose. So I am also maybe ambivalent, but I do want to see something added somehow, I guess. So
Is your issue this specific wording and criteria, or is it along the lines of what Jessica is talking about with the wetlands?
I don't know if I'd call it an issue. I just wanted us to, again, not have too many points in one area. So again, yeah, just because the way we're doing this is how many points does a land end up getting? So if it, checks 1, it'll end up checking all 3, or if it checks 0, it will miss all. Because yeah, if we find a really cool urban property, it might not be in any of these 3. We've already gone like 0 for 3 or something. So it's like they've already maybe missed those. But if it's just 2, then it will, obviously be able to make up the difference if it's useful elsewhere. So I would like to see the wording included. I hope I'm not going around in what I'm saying, but that is my suggestion, I guess.
Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead with the wetland issue and see if this is then incorporated.
Yeah.
So as part of that wording, if that's okay. Okay. So can we go?
Slide number 28.
Would you like to skip to wetlands and then come back? Is that what I heard? I'm sorry. You want to do this one next?
Yes, I would
Okay.
like to skip to wetlands, please.
So the alternative is to change the wording a little bit. We felt it was important to have in environmentally sensitive lands because we address uplands and scarce habitats. We address coastal and estuarine systems, and we don't really address wetlands. So that's why we came back. You asked us to revisit. We tweaked the language a little bit, and our alternative is, does the property contain high functioning or potentially high functioning wetland ecosystems, potentially operationalized as minimum restoration on our part?
Okay.
Do we have a map of high functioning wetlands?
No, but
Or do we just guess?
We'll use the, do you want to talk about UMAM and this?
Right. So we can use the state's criteria for ranking isn't the right word, for determining the function of wetlands. What we don't want to necessarily tie ourselves into is doing the full, it's called UMAM, it's an acronym, do the full UMAM assessment. It's fairly lengthy and involved, but you have very experienced land management staff who can absolutely determine if a wetland is high functioning or with minimal restoration could be high functioning. And we put the word ecosystems sort of to get at your comment last time, John, about, okay, so maybe you have 1 acre of wetland in a 1,000-acre tract, and do you get that point? And so we were hoping that talking about an ecosystem might move us away from that potentially, you know, little tiny isolated wetland to something more of a functioning wetland system.
Okay, good, good.
Can we pick that up rather than potentially, which doesn't speak to the how high the bar is in terms of restoration? Can we incorporate the wording about minimal restoration being part of the effort so that we're not?
So of course, we could add to the last part of the sentence through restoration. So it would say, does the property contain high functioning or potentially high functioning wetlands through minimal restoration?
That would.
One of the things that I noted in the goal, because I had a concern about wetlands being more or less eliminated from the criteria at the last meeting. When you look at the resolution, one of the goals is restoration of wetlands. So I think somehow we need to incorporate that in here, that the goals do not give a degree of restoration. I can understand where we want to limit the amount of restoration as much as possible, but somehow one of the goals here is restoration of wetlands. So we've got to me, we have to incorporate that in here somewhere.
So you do not want to speak to, I guess, the measurement of that effort.
Minimal restoration? How do we qualify it, or do we need to qualify it to meet the goals, but also to meet our management plan? That's.
I don't think necessarily. So we could say through restoration, and then when we bring it back and do our report, we'll say this will be minimal restoration. You know, this will require minimal management. You know, and kind of give you the levels.
I'm good with that. I think the report will speak to it on a individual parcel basis. Okay, so with that,
A question.
I'm sorry.
Just a question for staff real quick. Would the area around a spring always be considered a wetland, or could it sometimes just be considered a spring shed?
I'll defer to environmental management.
So the state definition of wetland is actually wetland or surface water. The spring would be considered a surface water, so the spring itself would be a surface water. The area adjacent to the spring would be considered a wetland buffer. If that answers your question. Oh.
Thank you.
Okay. So Jessica, does that wording address your concern with wetlands?
Yes, I was saying, I think most of the environmentally sensitive land categories that we tweaked last time together kind of gets rid of the need for the addition in the first category. So I would move to approve the criteria with the alternative language proposed by staff.
Second.
Okay, and we're talking specifically on the wetland?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll say just this item 4.
Okay, so it's item 4 under environmentally sensitive land. We have a motion. Is there a second?
So that's going to give us 4 items under this environment.
Yes.
Thank you. Yep.
Any further? A second. Seconded. All right. We have a motion, a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, like sign? Okay.
Madam Chair, just as a point of clarification, it was with the alternative with the added language through restoration.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes, correct. Yep. Okay, so going back to proximity and connectivity. Jessica, I think your issue was addressed in the wetlands, and you believe that this is not necessary if the wetlands are addressed.
That's correct, but I do believe there were concerns about having this language somewhere else. So if we want to discuss that, I am good with withdrawing it, but
Okay, so Derek, it's yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think this, if I'm not mistaken, might have came from the North Florida Land Trust, a suggestion. So I mean, yeah, I do support this being somehow worded in there, but I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on where it could be. Again, just wherever it's, you know, forming a connection. I guess it might fit in with the corridor. I'd like to see if we fulfill that one of those priorities by, well, it says priority 1, 2, 3. Maybe we should just clarify also for the public, or if the staff knows, does 1 is the highest or 1 is the lowest? Highest, right? I mean, we could just reduce it to maybe priority 1 or something if we really wanted to restrict that too, but I assume that down to 3. Does it go lower than 3? I think there was even more.
It goes to 6.
At the 6. So we're just doing the top 3. So the top 3 highest categories out of 6. So I think that's worthy. And I don't have much else to say unless anyone else has any thoughts on where to put it. But I mean, I would make a motion to just combine it with one of the others. Does anyone have any thoughts on which other bullet point?
if we can we get staff's thoughts on, I know this is a potential funding source, which is great. So is it something that we could put in our enhancement criteria? I know that's kind of our catch-all section. Or if it's something that you think is covered by other criteria already, so it's just restating. If we meet other criteria, are we likely within priority 1, 2, or 3? Just some more insight.
So we've sort of eliminated the enhancement criteria. So to answer that, I do think that if a property was in one of these priority areas, it would get the point about number 2 under furtherance of acquisition. Is there reasonable expectation of matching funds? So I think you would meet that criteria. It doesn't specifically address those areas, and where we have properties that fall within this priority is sort of on the western side of the county, which isn't necessarily, it's not, so for instance, in the Volusia Conservation Corridor, it's not necessarily linked to something that we've already started. So they are kind of unique to some of our other projects that we've done already. So I don't think that it would fit in the, further a project begun under other existing programs. It is different than some of the other things we have. So you may potentially get a point for that criteria that you wouldn't have gotten if we don't include it. Does that make sense? We wouldn't have received a point from some other program, I guess, is my point.
So it does in fact expand to pick up something we're not picking up right now.
It does, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'm okay with it being another bullet point, I guess. Just my opinion.
Yeah, and I think if I'm understanding Derek, he's trying to, yes, expand so you don't miss a point that you wouldn't get someplace else.
That goes along with what I asked in the first meeting with new connectivity, which we still really haven't added anything that I can see for anything new connectivity. Keep
So are
going
you
back
saying
to
you
what
support it on that basis?
purchased.
Are you supporting it on that basis that it adds to a connectivity issue? That's what you're saying? Okay, so that's an argument in favor. Can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion to include that wording as the third criteria under proximity and connectivity.
Do you want the entirety? Do you want the priority 1, 2, or 3 of the Volusia Ecological Greenways?
Yes, I guess,
Okay.
unless I didn't hear any other suggestion. But yeah, sorry, I didn't read it, but yeah, as it's written.
Okay,
I'll second.
motion second. All those in favor of adding the wording for the inclusion of the priority 1, 2, or 3 of the ecological greenways item? Motion is second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, like sign? Okay. Okay. We
Slide
go
number
down to,
27, water resources.
does,
This is one we were asked to, that was tabled. And so we of staff have talked a little bit about it. We heard your comments and have proposed the alternative language. Does the property have the potential to capture beneficial recharge, reduce water consumption within a spring shed, or replace degraded freshwater supplies?
I will add that we reached out to the utilities director when we were trying to come up with language based on your conversation last time. And he had some really valid points. You know, we had talked about replacing water supply in spring sheds to meet the minimum flows and levels, et cetera. And he reminded us that there are other reasons that we may need to move potable water supply, especially as we experience saltwater intrusion into some of our current well field areas. So that's why we included this replace degraded freshwater supplies. So to get to Ms. Scheiber's original point about not necessarily supporting future development, but this would in fact supplant existing supply that may be in jeopardy.
discussion? I like the addition. I think it's good wording. Comments?
Super.
Super. Any discussion?
Yeah, it seems to be we're taking it from water development to back to conservation. Right? Is that because the one before, does the property have potential for resource potable water development? So I don't see that really listed in here. So that's, I would say I would agree with the alternative change. Yeah.
Okay, so we have an agreement. Can I get a motion?
I'd move that we accept the alternative language for number 4 under water resources.
Second.
Motion and second. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign? Okay. We've done the wetlands.
Slide number 29, resource-based recreation land. So we were asked to, so the initial suggestion was to further operationalize these terms, what is historical, archaeological, or cultural. There was some concern about the word cultural. And so we did a little research, and from my research, the term cultural is more of an umbrella term that is used to describe both archaeological and historical resources. So if you go to the Division of Cultural Resources in the state, they have 2 divisions, and one is historical and one is archaeological. And so as you can see on the next slide, I've defined the terms. I'm sorry, back to the terms. We actually define historical, resource, and archaeological site in our county code of ordinances. And so this is the definition of those 2 terms in our county code of ordinances. And so based on that, our staff alternative recommendation is to strike the words cultural because that's more of an umbrella term. And the suggestion is, does the property contain an archaeological site or historical resources?
Move for approval of the alternative language.
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign? Okay.
Okay, so slide number 31, this was approved, but staff, as we read it, that this was not a question in the affirmative like every other question that we have. So we would be minusing a point if they qualified for this. And so we actually are, and rather than just wordsmithing it, we have some new information that we got from the Florida Natural Areas Inventory. And what their scientists suggest and what they do is that if it's more than 5% coverage, that's going to require control. And so that would be a management consideration. And so just for the precision to improve the precision of this criteria, our recommendation is they're limited, which is less than 5% by ocular view, Florida Pest Council Category 1 invasive exotic plant coverage observed. Not all exotics are created equal. The ones that we really need to be worried about are the Category 1 list that's updated every 2 years.
Move for approval of the alternative language.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, like sign.
We have 19 criteria now, as opposed to the previous 18. So we've added one. So we need to have a discussion on what percentage do we want to stay at near that 60%. You know, last week we said 7 of the 12, so 58%. So what number for, let me back up a little. Previously for fee simple, the purchase or acquisition to be considered, it was 10 of 18, which is about 50%, a little over. And for the conservation easements, it was 5 of 18. So we need to have that conversation as to, do we want to stay at that for both of them? Do we feel they need to be adjusted?
So just for some math, 11 of 19 equals 58%.
What's 10 of 18?
$55.
Well, the only actual new criteria then we added was the one I made the motion for. Is that correct?
Correct.
So really, if we just consider that like a bonus point, if we just keep it at 10, or if it's like a requirement, then it's like 11. That's one way to think of it. But I'm okay with keeping it at 10 out of 19.
And 10 of 19 is 52.6%.
Any discussion? Derek, is that a motion to maintain the current scoring? What is it, the ratio? Okay, maintain the current ratio.
Yes, I guess I would be happy to make a motion, keep it at 10, and we'll talk about the easement separately, I guess. Is that, yeah,
Yes,
just for
we
the
can.
main part. Yeah, 10 out of 19 is sufficient.
I would second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and second to maintain the current ratio for fee simple acquisition.
Is that 10 or 11?
10 of, it would be 10 of 19. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Okay, on the conservation easement. Current scoring is 5 of 18.
Which is, yeah. And 5 of 19 is 26.3.
Any discussion?
How many criteria were there before? Weren't we at
18.
13 or?
18, we've gone to 19. Yeah.
Sorry.
So, any interest in changing? Okay, if not, can I get a motion on maintaining the current ratio for scoring it on easements?
I move we maintain the current ratio on easements, 5 of 19.
I would second
that.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Okay. Public participation. Do we have any requests?
If anyone online would like to speak, please raise your hand. Madam Chair, I have no cards from the audience and no one online is indicating they would like to speak.
Okay, with that, any comments from the advisory committee members? You've done yeoman's work this morning.
So I have a question. When someone, a willing seller or someone that comes up for an easement, let's say, I think an easement is where I was going with this. Can a landowner request that the USDA is not a participant, meaning that the Volusia Forever would fully fund the easement request? I ask that because some individuals may not agree with some USDA requirements. So,
Interesting question.
yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
I would say that, so the program that we have aligned with is that the organizing agency or governmental body makes application to USDA. So I believe that we make the application, the district conservationist comes out, fills out a report about the farm that kind of verifies what we've submitted as part of our application. So the farmer per se would not be filling out any USDA forms. It would be us.
So I think my question could be better asked because I don't fully understand this. Are we going to be fully funding ourselves easements and also the participant with USDA, or is it only the USDA that's funding?
So I think so the precision in our words here is important because the primary criteria funds conservation easements. The forests and farmland will fund agricultural easements. The ag easements, there is a partner for some of the USDA is the partner that we're aligning with. The conservation easements, our best partner has been the Water Management District or some other, private entities. So it's an application process, the way that the USDA works. So we would take our applications, kind of score them in-house, meet with USDA, think the best ones that we have an opportunity for a funding partner, and probably submit those as I think through it in my head.
Brad, I think he's thinking that the USDA puts additional restrictions or requirements on the purchase of the easement above what the county would. And the property owner may not want that.
Correct.
Is that not
Yes,
what you're hitting on, right?
Right.
So we propose the easement agreement. So we negotiate with the landowner and take it to USDA as my understanding of the process. They probably could suggest changes to it, but it's our negotiation with the landowner.
So do we have the opportunity to fully fund it excluding the USDA?
Certainly.
Okay, that was my question.
I have a question on the urban parcel discussion. Number 2, partner manages parcel subject to land management plan consistent with conservation values approved by county. Wasn't that incorporated in somewhere into the criteria? Because we discussed this at
It's
meeting.
under
Under management.
management. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm
The
looking
first
at the
point
wrong
under
one.
management is we added, or will it be managed by
By
others? It used to just read, is the size, access, location appropriate for cost-effective management? So we added that little bit about, or will it be managed by others?
So was there a reason then that staff listed it under discussion? Were you looking for something?
Necessarily, we just wanted to ensure that this would be treated like any other entity under the primary criteria, is that we typically negotiate or we lead the management plan. If we're making an investment, there needs to be a plan in terms of how the parcel will be managed. It was just a discussion point. I think we've covered it in the other items.
Eric?
So these are just open comments and
Yeah.
something that I think is within our purview to look at. It's not a criteria or anything, so it can be later time, but I do want to talk about the kind of roads that might go through here. So not just for like byways and scenic highways, but in some of our lands, if it's a large property, there will be roads going through there. And I just want to know what our policies are on paving them. And I know that like I don't want to see like 4-lane roads like going through or widenings without because we're losing conservation land. And I'm less concerned about trails, although we can combine that conversation with what kind of trails, how wide, and I don't know, or maybe that's more echo, I suppose. But in terms of, I don't know, I'm thinking of some of the large parcels in our corridor that kind of bifurcated by, let's just say I-4, right? I mean, like out west or west of where I am, at least, we have land and there's like underpasses for animals, but like I'm pretty sure that's some of that is our is conservation land that we've purchased in the past. And if they want to just say, hey, we want to add like 8 more lanes, and like they just take away part of our land we bought, are we fighting against that, or are we like making sure that they keep the overpass or the underpasses for the animals and things like? So I do want to at some point, I mean, we don't have to do that today, obviously. There's some broader, it's a large category to talk about, but to make sure that we are not just allowing paving to happen without kind of saying, no, this is preservation to some degree. So
just to provide some quick clarification, whenever the Florida Department of Transportation initiates any kind of widening, specifically of state highways or federal highways, they have to go through what is called plan development and environmental analysis. That's where those issues are addressed. And does it necessarily stop them from going forward with it? No. But what it does do is it indicates what the mitigation requirements. And I'll give you an example is the Gemini Springs addition was part of the I-4 widening project. So when DOT did the analysis of what their impacts were going to be on the wetlands in those wetland areas, they went in and acquired additional lands that added on to the Gemini Springs Park area. So again, can it help prevent bad design? Yes. Can it prevent roadways from being put in? Not always, especially if you're talking about widening as opposed to a new roadway. So, but we can provide additional information about that at a later meeting.
Thank you for that. And so yeah, it goes with the utilities as well. If someone's putting in the any sort of pipes or electricity through there. So yeah, I appreciate that. We'll talk later. And yeah, as long as people are aware that we're hopefully we're getting something back if we do lose that land, or people can comment during the PD&E studies. That would be good to be aware of. So thank you.
Okay. Any further comments? Okay, Brad, our meeting with County Council.
Thank you, everyone, for your work today and over the last several months. We're getting close. And so our next step is a July 13th joint workshop with County Council. We'll be downstairs in the training room, 1:30 to 3:15. So we have an hour and 45 minutes with them. The way that we envision the agenda is that we'll open it with an overview of the process that we're using for acquisitions. We have a solid framework. The process worked in the past. Give you both an overview, the council and you an overview, discuss the timeline going forward. And what I would suggest is for you to have a conversation with the council about the criteria that you're recommending. So I'll develop a table that has the new criteria and the old criteria as a comparison for you and the council. So if they have any questions why there are changes, that will facilitate that discussion.
Thank you.
And then I'll present so we want to get that primary criteria nailed down with them that day. And then followed by that, talk a little bit about the forests and farmlands and get some direction there and present what we have, our working document that was approved today.
Would you be presenting that? The forest and farmland?
I can if you'd like. I mean, it's at well, staff will be there to support both the council and.
Likewise. So- Okay, is there any further comment? Any further items, any good business to discuss? Okay, there's no further discussion. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you. We did it.
Yeah, it's kicking ass right there.
This one, my tiny lunch. Group of Friday at 11:30. A little too late.
Oh, man.
12 meetings.
Lunch?